place is going insane.
Is there like a specific problem with Islam you brought up to him?
We're doing the whole Quran burnings and the recitations.
Have you brought up Sahih Muslim 1050?
That's the one where Abdul Musa al-Ashari,
the son of Abu Musa al-Ashari.
Yes, that one.
Yes, where he forgets an entire chapter of the Quran.
We're telling them about the karat, karat, and they're saying it's different, a different pronunciation.
It's more than that.
It's more than that.
Yep.
But if you want to say that all of the Qur'ans are not identical to each other, then you can just say that, look, there are 7 Qur'ans at least.
It was 7, and Muhammad said there were sent 7 different ones. 7 different ones. That's what he said.
I call that the logical problem.
The Qur'ans, yeah.
I should not do to him because that's.
Why is he still talking over there?
Because he's scared.
No, bro, don't go. Yo, yeah. Yes, your man is after discovering something serious today. He didn't know somebody banned the Quran.
Oh, I just found a random one regarding the recitations. So this one is in Sahih Muslim 821a. So it says Allah has commanded you to recite to your people the Quran in one dialect. Upon this he said, I ask for Allah pardon and forgiveness. My people are not capable of doing it. He then came for a second time and said, Allah has commanded you that you should recite the Quran to your people in 2 dialects.
So he changed his mind.
Yes. Upon this, the Prophet again said, I seek your pardon. This is that thing where he bargains.
Yeah.
Right? So I seek pardon and forgiveness. My people would not be able to do so. Then Jibril came a third time and said, Allah has commanded you to recite the Quran to your people in 3 dialects, upon which the same thing happens again, and he comes again a 4th time, and again he says, you can do it in 4 dialects. Allah has commanded you to recite the Quran to your people in and then he says it again, and then Allah says,
is the actual Arabic word there dialect?
I can find that for you. But it says, so the Quran to your people in 7 dialects, and in whichever dialect they would recite, they will be right.
If you recall what Chris found as well, is they don't know what the ahruf is from the Hadith itself.
Yeah.
So I'm very questionable as to whether that actually translates as dialect.
Let me see.
Because modern Islamic scholars don't know if the ahruf is a dialect.
It might just say mode.
Yes, that's what I'm suspecting it says.
Let me consult Sheikh ChatGPT. By the way, is actually a great translator. It's better than what you have in Sunnah.com. It was able to translate that hadith about Waraka bin Nawfal writing the Gospels in Arabic. Actually, the Arabic says Hebrew, not Arabic. So yeah, it was also going to tell you that it was from this guy, that guy.
Yeah, once we get past the
okay. The Prophet was at the watering place. In that place, then Jibril, peace be upon him, came and said, "Indeed."
Modes.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it doesn't say dialect.
Yeah.
So that's where they've changed the translation to try to make it seem to Muslims like the ahruf is just a dialect.
Yeah.
That is very sneaky.
Yeah. And then I can even ask it to show me the character that means modes.
Wow.
So sure.
Yes, the word is just ahruf.
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't say.
For example, you say that
you know what would be interesting to ask them? Just to say, where do you get this idea that the ahrufs are just dialects?
The sheikhs lie to them.
Yeah, because if they say, the hadith or the sunnah or something, then you can just be like, where does it say that?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's basically this character, the sort of like the backwards, the sort of like G with a dot on it, and then the J with this like weird sideways. So if we do the G with a dot, a J, and then this seemingly like sideways A, if I do that, it should be then. So the G, the J, and the upside down A is that one.
That is funny that the translators put their own like
Little theological
their
spin on it.
theological spin.
Yeah. Well, if anything, this looks like an apologetic spin, really.
Yeah.
Dialects. Because Chris raised this point earlier on. If the Quran is revealed in these 7 dialects, then that would be the equivalent of if Muhammad was an English speaker, and then and he would receive a revelation, say it in one dialect, and then change to another dialect. So one moment he'd sound like Paul Williams. Indeed, it is Allah.
And he sounds like Stephen Gerrard.
And then suddenly he changes it. Indeed, it's Allah who said, "Now, what? How does that make any sense?" So imagine like hearing a man who will be speaking in one dialect 1 second and then change it to different dialects. Clearly, it was the same dialect but a different way of saying it. Sometimes these ways can be contradictory, which is the issue. Like in the story of Lot and his wife. Some modes will tell you that she left with them, and some will say that she didn't leave with them. So what happened?
Yeah.
They're apologetic. This is giving you a comprehensive notion of all the events that occurred. So it's impossible to do that in one mode. You have to have multiple modes to give you the full story.
There was another one that Chris used. Was it sort of 10? It was like basically a direct contradiction.
Yep.
Let me try it. I think I have some brief notes. It's not really my thing, but
Hey, ain't nothing wrong with dipping your toes in other areas. Sorry.
Q&A, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. So the Hadith, the science of the Hadith, you have Chinese whispers where one person says to another person, and they say that the validity is because of this science of the Hadith. You know, there are people who are reliable, etc.
Yeah.
Who validates it?
So, effectively, the science comes later within Islamic history. Initially, there was no science to begin with. People simply trusted that if a well-known sheikh said something and attributed it to Muhammad and the initial Sahaba, then it will be true. However, a proliferation of false hadiths started making their way in the Islamic world, and people were using these false hadiths to justify things that they wanted to be true by attributing them to Muhammad. So then it became a case where only a select few scholars could be referenced. Then it became even more stringent. It became a case where the scholars had to somehow tie their knowledge back to Muhammad and the Sahaba. And that's sort of the final stage of the hadith verification tradition. And then there's like a multitude of other ways by which you can verify a hadith is indeed from people who are thought to be reliable narrators. And effectively, they're all subjective criteria. The person has to be trustworthy, have a good memory, be able to tie themselves back realistically to one of the Sahaba or Muhammad. And then it becomes very interesting when you try to gauge how you can call somebody trustworthy if everybody's prone to lying. So therefore, even if the person never told a lie, or even if the person, always lied every day of their life, why would that make it impossible for them to be able to transmit reliably something that they heard Muhammad say? So it's not very reliable, even if you look at it in that capacity. All of the criteria are subjective, and in the hadiths, there's so much mutation and recreation that a single hadith can have 10 different forms, and they're all thought to be reliable when they all give different information about the same instance. So ultimately, there is no real benefit to adhering to hadith science. And if you want any scholarly work on this, there is a Harvard professor of Islamic studies in America called Joseph Little. And he wrote
Joshua Little.
Joshua Little. And he wrote a thesis essentially defending the idea that the hadith about Aisha's age. If you can bring them up. But he has a dissertation around why the age of Aisha given in the hadith is untrustworthy. And in the very beginning of his dissertation, he basically obliterates the idea of hadith science because of the mutation and the proliferation of false hadiths and how every single single hadith that is thought to be even sahih has multiple different variations that it's impossible to actually tell what the original version of the hadith was. So even if you can say it's sahih or daif or hasan, it doesn't really help you come into the actual truth of what the initial hadith is trying to convey. And I think,
he says a few. This is what he says in his interview with Dr. Javad Hashmi.
Okay.
So he says that one problem is the lateness of sources.
Yep.
So all the hadiths were compiled 800 AD or after. Another is contradictions in the hadiths.
Sure.
So he says there are multiple conflicting, competing, often distinctively accounts regarding most of the major events and episodes in the alleged life and times of Muhammad, including the identity of Muhammad's first male follower, the quantity and identity of Muhammad's wives, the quantity and identity of Muhammad's children, the date of Muhammad's birth, the age of Muhammad's first wife upon their marriage, the age of the first wife upon their marriage, in their entries to do with the Sirah literature in the Surah Maghazi literature. So that's one problem he brings. So those are two problems. More are propagandistic reports, historical anachronisms, mass fabrications, late isnads, rapid growth in numerical hadith, peculiar patterns and inconsistencies, hadith that contradict earlier sources. There are a whole bunch of things that he lists.
Exactly. So hadith effectively, or the hadith science, isn't a science. It's more of a pseudo-science, if anything. And it's nothing that you can... So in the scientific method, there's the idea of being able to like test and replicate the outcomes of any given experiment or proposition. You can't really do that with the hadith. And when you try to do it, you wind up actually having nothing.
So how do you validate it when the sources are dead?
There is no way of validating it. You're gonna have to go with effectively like Islamic hagiography. You're gonna have to go with like their telling of history. And so if their telling of history is basically impossible to actually verify outside of their own methodology, then it's probably not reliable.
I mean, the only way to access the oral tradition is through the written one that we have today.
Exactly. And that's a problem you could even attribute all the way back to Uthman. So Uthman, like we just read in the Hadith in Bukhari, there was an issue with recitations, and Uthman chose to solve it by committing the recitations into writing, as if that would somehow stop them from reciting it otherwise. But whatever. Very interesting mechanic.
There was actually a hadith where two people from the same Qurayshi tribe differ on the way they recite it, which to me is like, if these are just different dialects, why are two people from the same tribe
with the same dialect
it differently?
Exactly. It wouldn't be the case.
Yes.
So therefore, the modes are a more like suitable translation for that sort of like G with a dot and then the J and then the sideways A.
That word,
Yeah, I love this in Japan. You can actually just like look up patterns and like rather than recognize the patterns and then just like take it from there. So if I ever see that G with the J and then the A, I'm like, okay.
Now you know the word.
That's modes. I can write it.